There we go. All right. Okay. We are streaming unlisted. Let's get started. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, friends. So now, as we are continuing with the characteristics of existence, we have come to the first noble truth, the noble truth of dukkha. Now, it should be understood that the three characteristics of existence are kind of a natural progression or a natural outgrowth. The dukkha arises because of how we engage with impermanent, unstable, and undependable experience. The Buddha says that there are three kinds of dukkha. First one is dukkha dukkha. Dukkha dukkha is the physical pain, right? Physical suffering. The second is viparinama dukkha. What is viparinama? Things arise, they persist for a time, and then they cease. Viparinama is that changing nature, that arising and ceasing. So you have a job and it's going well for 10 years, and then you get fired or you get let go. And boy, is that suffering, right? Because you got so used to having that stability and it's gone. You're married for a long time and then the person dies or they fall out of love and they divorce, right? You've had your trusty car for 15 or 20 years and then finally it's really dead beyond any kind of amount of money worth fixing it. All right, you have your children with you for 18 years. Then they go off to college and then they move away, maybe even to other states across the country. Right? This is the dukkha, this is the suffering of change, of the rise and fall of things. And then the third kind of dukkha is sankhara dukkha. We talked about sankhara a little bit in the last talk. Right? Sankhara is all things that are conditioned nature. Right? These are sankharas. You could say, what are the sankharas that led to me being born? Right? What are the causes and conditions? What are the sankharas? The sankharas are all those various constituent components coming together. So the very fact of conditioned existence is suffering. This last one is very deep, very subtle, hard to see. Physical pain and the pain of change and loss is if you live 10, 15 years, you've seen enough of both of those, right? So you have that experience. But having the understanding of sankhara dukkha takes very deep wisdom and insight and seeing things as they are. Right? Sankhara dukkha, understanding sankhara dukkha starts when you start to realize that you really don't want to have to come back again. Right? Like, oh, I've lived this life and man, I'm not sure yet if there's other lives after this, but I don't want to do it again. And you don't even have to have like a miserable life. You can just have like a regular life to have that reflection. It's not like you have to like, be born in a horrible place and all your family dies before you're 5 and then all kinds of bad things happen to you. And it doesn't even have to be that extreme. You can just recognize and understand as you practice, as your insight and wisdom deepens, that, whew, I don't want to do this again. Yeah, there's lots of good things and there's lots of good times. There's also lots of bad things and bad times, and this is just exhausting. By that point, you understand. You're starting a little bit to understand the sankhara dukkha. So these are the 3 main types or broad categories of dukkha that the Buddha speaks about in the suttas. And so one thing that should be understood about dukkha is that when we say that something is a characteristic of existence, what the Buddha is not saying here, and the Buddha has actually clarified this in the suttas as well, what the Buddha is not saying here is that there is an inherent dukkhaness in your spouse or your child or your car or whatever experience you might have. What the Buddha is saying, we'll cover a couple suttas here that explain this. The Buddha is saying here is it's because of our ignorance how we engage and have expectations with these things that is the cause of our suffering. Think about it this way. We just talked about anicca this morning, right? Everything except for nibbana is impermanent, unstable, undependable. What are you doing when you attach to something that's permanent, that's impermanent, unstable, and undependable, and then acting like, well, it's just going to be this way forever? You might not be verbalizing, I think this is permanent, stable, and dependable. But you have a delusion, you have an expectation that this is permanent, stable, and dependable. And the minute you do that, the minute you take something that is unstable, undependable, and impermanent and expect it to be stable, dependable, and permanent, you have created a booby trap or a landmine of suffering. And eventually, it could be the next day, it could be 50 years from now, eventually, you step on that mine or that booby trap and you suffer because of it. So it should be understood in this way. What is the creation of dukkha? So let's go to a sutta, inward exploration. Let's read from the sutta. The Buddha explains, how does one do inward exploration? Here, bhikkhus, when engaged in inward exploration, a bhikkhu explores thus: the many diverse kinds of suffering that arise in the world, headed by aging and death. What is the source of this suffering? What is its origin? From what is it born and produced? When what exists, does aging and death come to be? When what does not exist, does aging and death not come to be? As he explores thus, he understands the many diverse kinds of suffering that arise in the world headed by aging and death. The suffering has acquisition, this desire to grasp, to have, the craving to cling on to something pleasant. All right, this is what we mean by acquisition, the chase, the search, to grasp, to cling, to have. That's what we're talking about, acquisition. The suffering has acquisition as its source, acquisition as its origin. It is born and produced from acquisition. When there is acquisition, aging and death come to be. When there is no acquisition, aging and death do not come to be. He understands aging and death, its origin and cessation, in the way leading on that is in conformity with cessation. He practices in that way and conducts himself accordingly. This is called the bhikkhu who is practicing for the utter complete destruction of suffering, for the cessation of aging and death. And then it goes on, and he continues, what is the source of this acquisition? What is its origin? What is it born from, etc.? Acquisition has craving, the second noble truth, as its source, as its origin. It is born and produced from craving. When there is craving, acquisition comes to be. When there is no craving, acquisition does not come to be. And then engaging further in exploration, he questions, when this craving arises, where does it arise? Whatever in this world has a pleasant and agreeable nature, this is where this craving arises. So you have a pleasant experience, you want to crave, that craving causes you to cling to it, to want to acquire it, which then leads to suffering. And so there's a simile that the Buddha gives. This is actually quite a famous simile. Suppose, bhikkhus, that there was a bronze cup of a beverage having a fine color, aroma, and taste, but it was mixed with poison. Then a man would come along, oppressed and afflicted by the heat, tired, parched, and thirsty. They would tell him, good man, this beverage in the bronze cup has a fine color, aroma, and taste, but it is mixed with poison. Drink it if you wish. If you drink it, it will gratify you with its color, aroma, and taste, but by drinking it, you will meet death or deadly suffering. Suddenly, without reflecting, he would drink the beverage. He would not reject it, and therefore he would meet death or deadly suffering. So too, bhikkhus, whatever ascetics and Brahmins in the past, in the future, at present, regard that in the world with a pleasant and agreeable nature as permanent, as happiness, as self, as healthy, as secure, they are nurturing craving. In nurturing craving, they are not freed from suffering. And the Buddha explains it right there. The Buddha explains to us how we create our suffering. Whatever we experience out in the world is impermanent, is unstable, is undependable. And our natural modus operandi, our anussaya, our habitual tendency is to cling to that. And we kind of think that if we hold it really tight, it won't go away. But eventually it slips through our fingers. The Buddha in other sutras talks about that goes through a cycle, and he'll say there's acquisition, but then it goes away, something happens, then there's chase, right? So there's craving, acquisition, chase, acquisition, and then there's the taking up of swords and fighting and things like that, which leads to suffering. So this is where, the term dukkha, pretty much all of you, or most all of you here, have heard me talk many times. I tend to not like to translate these key words, and that's because there is, especially with a word like dukkha, there's no really one word that really encapsulates what it is. Suffering is okay, but it's not all encompassing, right? Another translation is unsatisfactoriness. And that's also not that great. But in this case, when we're talking about the three characteristics of existence, I think it works better than any other English word. Because what unsatisfactory is telling us is that when somebody has some wisdom into the nature of anicca, then they know clinging to something that is unstable, undependable, and impermanent just leads to suffering. It's unsatisfactory. It won't lead to any kind of permanent happiness, permanent contentedness. No craving can. The Buddha basically tells us that our craving is insatiable. He uses examples like, the king conquers all the land he can see, and he reaches the shore, and he looks across the shore to look at the next lands to conquer. The Buddha is tempted by Mara, and Mara says, "You're very powerful. If you wanted, you could make Mount Meru into coins and be so rich." And the Buddha said that even the amount of coins as tall as Mount Meru, which is basically a fictional mountain, it would literally go like halfway to the moon, or like a quarter. It's like it would literally go into space if it was in reality. It's a gigantic mountain. And so you got to think about like a mountain that goes into space of gold coins. And what does the Buddha say? That would not be enough for one person. Our craving is insatiable. When you really, really, really reflect on it, even me now, today, after 20 years of practice, I can notice in myself, like I'll have some good tasting food and it'll be gone an hour later, or not even an hour, half hour later. Oh, I really like some of that good tasting food again. Right? And no matter how much you say, but you just had it. Well, that's in the past, man. That doesn't even exist. That's gone. Right? I want it now. I want more now. Right? You can see that in the mind. That's the nature of the mind. And because of this clinging and wanting and desiring to acquire, we create suffering. And there's a wonderful sutta, and I'm going to share this, and we're going to read not all of it because it's somewhat big, and we don't have all the time in the world. But I'm going to read this directly to you because we're going to read it together, and because this is the Buddha, like shooting straight to the heart and saying, "Oh, you want me to teach you about dukkha? Well, let's talk about dukkha." So let me share this. Where are we here? All right. So the name of this sutta, and as I've been saying, every one of these suttas that I read, the reference sheet has the links. So, if later, you want to go back, you can always, you can always read it on your own. So this is with Bhadrika. And so Bhadrika comes to the Buddha and asks him, please teach me the origin and cessation of suffering. Oh boy, this layperson wants to know the big deal right off the bat. And so the Buddha says, if I were to teach you about the origin and disappearance of suffering in the past or in the future, you might have doubts or uncertainties and be confused. Right now, rather, Chief, I will teach you about the origin and disappearance of suffering as I am sitting right here and you are sitting right there. Listen and apply your mind. I will speak. Yes, sir. What do you think, Chief? Are there any people here in Urvelakapa who, if they were executed, imprisoned, fined, or condemned, it would cause you sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress? Yes, sir. But are there any people here in Uruvelakapa who, if they were executed, imprisoned, fined, or condemned, it would not cause you sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and distress? There are, sir. So the Buddha basically goes right to his attachment, his craving. Are there people who, if we're killed in this city, you would have sadness and distress? Are no other people that you wouldn't? And he says, yes, both. There would be, obviously. So what's the cause, Chief? What's the reason why, if this was to happen to some people, it could cause you sorrow, while if it happens to others, it would not? And so this chief says, the people regarding whom this would give rise to sorrow are those I have desire and passion. The people regarding whom this would not give rise to sorrow are those I don't have desire and passion. With this present phenomena that you have seen, understood, immediately attained, and fathomed, you can apply the same method to the past and future. All the suffering that has arose in the past was rooted and sourced in desire. For desire is the root of suffering. All the suffering that arises in the future will be rooted and sourced in desire. For desire is the root of suffering. That's incredible, sir. It's amazing. Well said. All of the suffering that arises is rooted and sourced in desire. And so this is a wonderful, so those of you who are parents, you can understand this next line that comes, right? So, because this chief had some wisdom. He said, he wasn't, he had some intuitive, wisdom in these things. So and this is the chief just basically adding to this. I have a boy called Siravasi who resides in a house away from here. I rise early and send someone saying, go, my man, and check on my boy Siravasi. Until they get back, I worry. I hope nothing's wrong with Siravasi. Could you imagine being the son or the daughter, and every day your parents send somebody to just like, yeah, did they wake up alive, right? So this chief is like, oh yeah, that's I understand because this is what I do. I'm seeing this in my own experience, right? So there's some wisdom there. And then the Buddha says, what do you think, chief? If Siravasi was executed, imprisoned, fined, or condemned, would it cause you sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and distress? How could it not, sir? This, too, the Buddha says, is a way to understand all the suffering that arises is rooted and sourced in desire, for desire is the root of suffering. What do you think, chief? Before you'd seen or heard of Siravasi's mother, did you have any desire, passion, or fondness for her? No, sir. Then was it because you saw or heard of her that you had desire or passion or fondness for her? Yes, sir. What do you think if Siravasi's mother was executed. Would it cause you sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress? How could it not, sir? This too is a way to understand all the suffering that arises is rooted and sourced in desire, for desire is the root of suffering. Isn't that so beautiful? Like, so, I mean, that is the Buddha's mastery of telling you something very deep in a way that anybody can understand. Right? Everybody has some kind of loved one, even if they hate humans, but they love cats or dogs or whatever. Right? Um, so this is so wonderful, so beautiful to understand that because you have this expectation, this desire, this is my son, this is my spouse, this is my daughter, whatever, we kind of expect, or we have a secret hope that they live long. Or if you have, like one day I have to lose my spouse, but you think, well, that's like 50 years from now, maybe. We kind of, we like to delude ourselves. We like to live in delusion. As I was been talking the first night, last night, we talked about this. We would rather live in a pleasant delusion than reality. And the reality is everything, everyone, every experience that you will ever have is within a existence where sabbe sankhara anicca, all conditioned things are impermanent, unstable, undependable. And so naturally, if you take what is stable, unstable, undependable, and impermanent as stable, dependable, and permanent, you are setting yourself up for suffering, just as we read in the first sutta that we read. So this is the origin of dukkha. The origin of dukkha is our craving for things to be other than what they actually are. Is our desire to want to have pleasant experiences and to hold on to them and to keep them forever. There's no such thing as forever. But until that time, we're pretty good. We live in a nice delusional world and it's not so bad. But boy, when that time comes, it can ruin us. I've seen it. There are people who, when they live in that world of delusion, when that bubble pops, they can't even get to the other end. They can't even get past the suffering from that bubble popping. They can't kind of process it and then live on or keep going. Right? It's so strong because the fantasy that they've lived in is so deep that they just can't handle the suffering. So as practitioners, we don't want to be that way. This is why we want to understand our dukkha. We want to understand what is the cause, right? What is the cause? It's craving. Where does that craving come from? Oh, it just comes from some external force. Some, what do they call, cosmic horror or some god or Cthulhu or whatever. It's some external force that, I can just be the victim and say, oh, it's outside's fault. No. Suffering is here. It arises here. It can cease here. And suffering ceases when we live in line with the nature of reality, when we live in line with anicca. we understand all of these things will go. Everybody I know, myself, all fun experiences. Think about experiences you had when you were younger, right? And how you've, over years and years and years, you tried to replicate that. I remember for myself, even just a small example. Everybody has hundreds of examples. For myself, I remember, playing like a video game when I was younger, like in my 20s. And then it goes away, and then I'm in my 30s. And then like I was like 10 plus years later, I'm trying to find that same thing again. When is somebody going to make that same thing again? Right? Or people who use drugs, right? And they're always trying to get that first high. We're always trying to replicate this experience. And the problem is we can't, because the causes and conditions that led to that experience are changed now. They're different. But it doesn't stop us from having lots of nostalgia about the past. Boy, back then it was such a golden era. Everything was great. That's the delusion in our mind. When you actually think about, well, let me look at all this. Actually, no, it wasn't all. There are good things, but it wasn't all that great either. Right? But we delude a bit. It's part of our delusion. And so then we're trying to acquire the pleasant experiences from the past. We just keep doing that. And boy, the Buddha says that we come to the end of our lives with plans unabated. All right, we want to keep having those pleasant experiences, and then we just because of that craving, we propel ourselves to the next life. Until one day, we're like, this suffering is not that great. I'd kind of rather shoot for the ending of suffering. That sounds much better. And then you practice and you practice and you practice over lifetimes. And one day, you end your suffering. Then, wonderful. But you don't even have to wait till the end. As you practice, you can notice, so much less suffering than I used to have. So nice. It's possible. Right? You actually, the practice can show you what is possible. You get little glimpses. Ooh, this is nice. I'll give a glimpse for myself. Last year, was it last year? No, yeah, last year. So it's been like a year and however many months. My mother died. And of course, I had been through so many deaths since I was 8 years old. So it's I knew the drill by then. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to, have grieving, and I'm going to grieve, and it's going to go through this process. And I just kind of expected, okay, this is what's going to happen. There's one thing I never expected. I cannot recall, since my mother's death, one mind moment of suffering in my mind. I'm still processing that, because it's kind of blows my mind. Like, what? Like, wow, really? Now, of course, you can't tell that to like the average person, because they'll be like, "Oh God, you're horrible. You didn't love your mother. You did." I was an Italian mama's boy, the oldest son. My mother was probably the closest person other than my wife that I was ever to in my whole life. So, so it's not like that at all. My mother was the first person I told I wanted to become a Buddhist monk, right? So it's not like that at all. But over the years of practice and understanding my attachments, even many years ago, I kind of felt that my attachment to my parents and to my sisters and all that was much less. It's not that I didn't, like think of them fondly as, these are the people who raised me. It's not none of that. It's not like I all of a sudden I'm totally emotionless towards them. It's just that my attachment to them was much less. And this is the experience. Like this is what is possible. No, now again, the average person would be like, "Oh, that sounds horrible. How could I not, feel that way about my mother or my father or whatever?" And there'd be some people who were like, "My mother was so horrible. I kind of wish I could feel that way." It depends on the person's experience. But this is what is possible, right? The more you cling to what is impermanent as permanent, you will suffer. And the more you understand what I am experiencing now will go away, then you understand, well, you know what? I might as well make the best of this. I might as well not take it for granted. You know, this is not going to be forever. That's a very important, wise way of understanding things that arise. So that's a way of that leads to less suffering. And so I think we are good for dukkha. So why don't we do our guided meditation where we'll do some contemplations and some investigation of dukkha. So set yourself up in whatever comfortable and stable position works for you. Start by doing the mindful scan of the body as we have been doing. You're done setting up your body in a comfortable and stable position. Let the body go. Start following the breath. Lay down your burdens. Remember to acknowledge, let go, and return. If any frustration or criticism arises in the mind, so you keep being distracted away from the breath, reflect on how that causes suffering, expecting the mind to stay in one place, thinking that you could stay on the breath for a long period of time without being distracted away. If you're meditating and a strong physical feeling like an itch or a pain arises and starts to take you away from the breath, you can use that opportunity to investigate and contemplate on that feeling. How has it arisen? How will it cease? What are my thoughts and feeling, my inbuilt reaction to that experience? Why does it cause me suffering? What is the nature of having a body? Examine the experience in that way. You can start to contemplate the different parts of this body and contemplate how they change over time from when you were younger to today, how they've become degraded, make things harder. Contemplate on the nature of the body and aging. Remember, you can use visuals if you like. Visuals can often be very helpful in these contemplating practices. You can make up words to repeat. I leave it up to you. Go with what feels most right and appropriate as you try to contemplate this body. Try to understand the body as it is, and then to understand how you have treated the body and reacted to the body as it is over your life. How wise and unwise have you done so? Also, contemplate the dangers of having a body, all the ways, all the parts of the body can get sick, how undependable and unstable they are, how all kinds of things can happen to the body. Now let's move to focusing on the mental aspects. Contemplate all of the ways your attachment, your clinging to something, your craving for something has led to suffering. And we're not necessarily talking about big things. In some ways, that can be easier to see, easier to contemplate. We're not talking about you lost a loved one and then you suffered because of the attachment, but more subtle, refined things. Maybe how holding on to a point of view has led you to suffer. All the different ways that your expectations of how things should be led you to believe things would be other than what they turned out to be. Spend some time contemplating the origin of your suffering in this way. You can also contemplate how, in the past, unskillful actions that you've taken that led to suffering. Maybe when you started in on those actions, you didn't expect or wish to have suffering. But because of your desire and expectations, you acted unskillfully and therefore created suffering for yourself. Slowly start to open your eyes, becoming aware of the room around you and your body's position in it. Reflecting on the state of your mind before and after the meditation, and contemplating any experiences that stood out. So now, friends, we have another break. It's about 3:30, so we have from 3:30 to 5 is a break time. Then from 5 to 6, 6:15-ish, meditation. This is self-led, inside, outside, walking, sitting, however you want to do it, on Zoom, off Zoom. It's up to you how you want to do that meditation period. And then we will come together back again at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, just in about 3 hours, to do our Q&A and then close out the evening for the retreat, at least, with our meditation. So I'll see you in about 3 hours, and have a productive free period and meditation period.